Okay, so let's say you're dreaming of France. You know, the Eiffel Tower, delicious pastries, charming villages. But have you ever thought about all the stuff travel guides just don't tell you? Like those unexpected quirks that actually end up making a place truly memorable? Well, that's exactly what we're going to dive into today. We've got this really interesting newsletter called Love to Visit France, so get ready for some surprises.
It really is fascinating, isn't it? How even when we think we know a place like the back of our hand, there are always these like hidden layers just waiting to be uncovered. That's got to be what makes travel so captivating, right?
Totally. And this newsletter dives right into that. Like one thing they suggest is ditching those, typical tourist traps and instead taking a backroads tour of Southwest France. It's all about those less traveled regions, the hidden gems that actually offer like a real glimpse into that authentic art of France.
It's like they're reminding us that travel isn't just about ticking off famous landmarks from a list. It's about like really immersing yourself in the local culture,
Mm.
embracing the unexpected, discovering those unique experiences that honestly you just wouldn't find in any guidebook.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of unexpected, get this. The newsletter mentions some Harry Potter-esque locations scattered throughout France. I never would have guessed.
Seriously.
Huh.
That's cool. It's like even in those destinations we think we know, there's always something new waiting to be discovered, right?
Totally. Like,
Right.
imagine stumbling upon a hidden alleyway in Paris that looks straight out of Diagon Alley. That'd be pretty magical, wouldn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Speaking of magical, what about experiencing the familiar in like a totally new way? The newsletter actually recommends dinner cruises in Paris as like a unique way to see the City of Lights.
Oh, yeah. Dinner cruises, that's a classic, but for a reason.
Yeah.
Imagine you're gliding along the Seine, the Eiffel Tower is just like glittering in the background, and you're savoring this delicious French meal. It really does add a whole new dimension to how you experience the city.
Right. And you know what? It kind of ties back to that whole idea of discovering those hidden gems. You know what I mean? Like, it's not just about finding secret locations. It's also about finding these unique ways to experience those iconic ones that everyone knows about. The newsletter even touches upon visiting Provence-Alpes-Côte d'Azur.
Ah, Provence. Now, that's the region that just like explodes with sensory experiences.
Yeah.
You can just picture those endless fields of lavender, the
Mm.
air is thick with the fragrance. And this region also has such a rich history of perfumery. It's home to Grasse, which is known as the perfume capital of the world. It's truly an experience unlike any other.
Wow, you're really painting a picture there.
Yeah.
And of course, we can't talk about France without mentioning the Champs-Élysées in Paris.
Yeah, the Champs-Élysées, such an iconic avenue, grand architecture, chic boutiques, and just this bustling energy. It's definitely a must-see for any first-time visitor.
For sure. But even if you've been to Paris before, there's always something new to discover there, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's all about how you choose to approach the experience. Are you just kind of observing from a distance, or are you really truly immersing yourself in everything the city has to offer? The sights, the sounds, the energy.
You've got a point there. Speaking of immersing ourselves, the newsletter also dives into some pretty interesting details about French culture and daily life. Like, did you know that bread is practically a religion in France?
Oh, absolutely. It's a classic example of how food can be so deeply intertwined with the country's identity. It goes way beyond just basic sustenance. It's about culture, tradition, even national pride in a way.
And they even have this whole section in the newsletter called mange, which is, of course, French for eat. And they talk about what it's actually like to grocery shop in France. Apparently, it's a completely different experience than what we're used to here.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm curious what makes it so different?
Well, from what the newsletter describes, it seems like there's a much bigger emphasis on fresh, local ingredients. Think smaller independent shops instead of these giant supermarkets we're used to. It's less about convenience and more about like really connecting with the people who grow and produce your food.
That makes a lot of sense, especially considering France's reputation for culinary excellence. It's interesting how even something as, every day as grocery shopping can reveal so much about a culture's values.
Yeah, totally. And it's these little details that can really, really enrich your travel experience, don't you think? Like, it's one thing to see the Eiffel Tower, right? But it's a whole other thing to actually understand the cultural context that surrounds it,
Yeah.
from the food people eat
Yeah.
to the way they interact with each other.
You're right. It's about connecting with a place on a much deeper level, going beyond just those surface level tourist attractions.
Okay, but before we get too philosophical here, There's one more thing I absolutely have to mention from the newsletter.
Okay, I'm all ears.
They have a whole section dedicated to how the ultra-wealthy travel in Paris.
Ooh, now that piques my interest. What kind of extravagance are we talking about here? Private jets, luxury yachts cruising down the Seine.
Hold on to your berets because this is where it gets really interesting. So the newsletter talks about how the super rich are all about like discretion and privacy.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily like flashing their wealth in your face, but they're definitely experiencing Paris in a way that most of us can only dream of.
That's interesting. It does kind of make you wonder, though, doesn't it? Like, is it even possible to experience the real Paris, the authentic local culture, when you're surrounded by that level of opulence and exclusivity?
That's something I've often wondered about myself. It does seem like there are these multiple layers to Paris, each with its own unique charm and appeal.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. There's really no single right way to experience a city as multifaceted as Paris. It all comes down to, your interests, your budget, obviously, and ultimately what you're hoping to get out of the trip.
Exactly. And that's one of the things I really appreciate about this newsletter. It gives you a taste of all the different flavors of France, from those quirky back roads to the glitzy high life, you know.
It's like a buffet of travel experiences. You get to pick and choose what appeals to you most, create your own unique journey.
You got it. And that's what makes travel so exciting. It's all about discovery, both of the world around us and of ourselves, I think. Speaking of which, this newsletter's got me thinking. I'm realizing that I'm way more drawn to those off-the-beaten-path experiences than I initially thought.
Me too. There's just something so alluring about discovering those hidden gems, experiencing a place through the eyes of the locals.
I know, right? Which actually brings us to another really intriguing point the newsletter makes.
Tell me more. I'm intrigued.
Okay, so they talk about how, in France, you might find yourself having these full-blown conversations with waiters, not just about, like, the food or the service, but about life, philosophy, you name it.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. It seems like it speaks to a completely different cultural approach to dining and social interactions. Like, in some cultures, mealtime is seen as this quick fuel up, get in, get out. But in France, it seems like more of an opportunity for genuine connection and conversation, a chance to savor the moment and engage with the people around you.
Yeah, I think that's a really refreshing perspective, isn't it? It makes me think about how travel can challenge those preconceived notions we have about how things should be.
It's all about broadening our perspectives, realizing that there are so many different ways of living and interacting with the world, and sometimes those differences can be incredibly enriching.
Absolutely. And speaking of enriching experiences, this newsletter also mentions something that many travelers might find a little unexpected.
Okay, what is it?
So they talk about the, shall we say, compact nature of some French elevators. You might find yourself squeezing into some rather tiny spaces.
Oh, yes, the infamous French elevators. They can definitely be a surprise for visitors who aren't used to them.
It's a funny little detail, but it actually speaks to like a broader trend you see in Europe. You'll find these charmingly small spaces all over. It's like a reminder to embrace the unexpected, even in those mundane aspects of travel.
Exactly. And those unexpected moments, they often lead to the most delightful stories, right? Just imagine, the potential for awkward encounters or even unexpected connections in such a confined space.
Ah, you've got a point. Okay, so we've talked about the off-the-beaten-path tours, the Harry Potter locations, those unique dining experiences. But now I'm really curious to hear more about the specific regions that the newsletter highlights. Where should we venture to next on our virtual tour of France?
Well, they just rave about Provence-Alpes-Côte d'Azur, which we touched on a little earlier, with the lavender fields. But it's also a haven for outdoor enthusiasts. Think hiking trails with those just breathtaking views, charming villages perched on hillsides, crystal clear waters, perfect for kayaking or paddle boarding, that kind of thing. It's a place where you can just really disconnect and get back to nature.
Okay, you had me at charming villages perched on hillsides. Sign me up. What else is there?
And then there's the Champs-Élysées in Paris, but the newsletter kind of pushes us to look beyond the obvious stuff there, those grand avenues and the designer boutiques. Did you know it's also home to some pretty incredible architectural gems, like
Mhm.
Art Deco buildings and these charming little passageways. They're like little time capsules transporting you back to a different era.
Oh, I love finding those little pockets of history,
Yeah.
unexpected places. It's like peeling back a secret layer of the city.
Exactly. It's about taking the time to really explore and savor the details that so many people miss.
And speaking of details,
Yeah.
the newsletter does remind us that, well, even in a place as magical as Paris, it's important to be aware of your surroundings,
Hmm.
you know, especially in those crowded tourist areas. It's easy to become a target for pickpockets or scams,
Yeah. That's important. It's so easy to get caught up in the excitement of travel and kind of let your guard down. It's important to be vigilant.
for sure. They even give some practical tips like, keep your valuables close, be wary of overly friendly strangers, and of course, reporting any suspicious activity.
Mhm.
Basic stuff. But it's easy to forget when you're, in a new place, caught up in the moment.
Definitely.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground, from hidden Harry Potter spots to charming villages to even, the importance of staying safe. But there's one more little tidbit from the newsletter that I just have to share.
Okay, what is it?
So they mentioned this town called Reykjavik. It's in the Alsace region. And apparently it's so picturesque, they call it a, quote, fairy tale village.
Oh, Rika Weir. I've heard of it. Isn't it known for those half-timbered houses, cobblestone streets, and the facades are all these bright colors? It's like something out of a storybook.
Exactly. The newsletter even included a photo from social media.
Hmm?
And honestly, it really does look like a fairy tale. Definitely adding that to my must-visit list.
It just goes to show you there's just so much beauty and wonder packed into every corner of France, you know? Sometimes all it takes is a little curiosity and a willingness to explore beyond those typical tourist spots to discover something truly magical.
Well said. Speaking of exploring beyond the familiar, this newsletter has really got me thinking about my own travel style. I think I'm realizing that I'm way more drawn to those off the beaten path experiences than I initially thought.
You know, I'm right there with you. There's something so alluring about discovering hidden gems, experiencing a place through the eyes of the locals. It's about embracing the unexpected, letting yourself be surprised by all the beauty and diversity the world has to offer.
I couldn't agree more. So as we kind of start to wrap up this deep dive into, love to visit France, I want to leave you with one final question. When you travel, what kind of off the beaten path experiences are you most drawn to? What are those hidden gems that you seek out?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think sometimes the best travel moments are the ones you just don't see coming, The ones that happen when you step outside that comfort zone a little.
That's true. It's funny. I came into this thinking we'd be talking about all the things, the sights, the foods, those tiny elevators. But what really stuck with me is, well, the human element of it all.
I get that. Yeah, it's like from those conversations with waiters to the way they shop for food, there's this emphasis on connection, taking your time, really savoring the experience.
Totally. And honestly, that's something we can all learn from, right? No matter where we travel. It's about slowing down, being present, appreciating the simple things that make a place special.
Couldn't agree more.
So, as we say, au revoir to this deep dive into, well, the unexpected side of France.
Mm.
I want to leave you with this thought. It's not just about what you see when you travel, it's about how you see it. Are you open to those little quirks, the unexpected moments, the things that really give a place its character?
Because often it's those moments that help us connect with a place in a deeper way and maybe even learn a little something about ourselves along the way.
Well said. Until our next deep dive, keep exploring, keep learning, and most importantly, keep an eye out for those delightful little quirks that make the world such a fascinating place.